Hello and welcome to our balance change review of May 2022. So, Maid Madness number 3, as some people might call it, because there is a lot of changes, although not as much as the previous Maid Madness is.
Yeah.
But most importantly, balance changes. There's a lot of cards are banned.
Yeah, so I think the biggest part of this May Madness is, if it's even madness, is that a lot of these don't really affect many decks. Well, all these changes are pretty minor in the grand scheme of things, but if you were playing a few of these cards, it matters a ton.
Yeah, so first of all, balance changes. Hellbent Speed is banned. Lilies Studies is banned. Scintillate is banned, and Unleash the Dragon is banned. So you can probably tell what they're targeting with these bans.
Yeah, and it goes further than that with Ardy's Invocation being replaced with a different card, as well as Realms Overturning. I guess we can go the combo changes first and what they kind of mean. So I think Realms Overturning is probably the most isolated kind of change.
Yeah, but basically it means Rejuvenation, unless Rejuvenation is dead, Rejuvenation is dead, and actually that's pretty much all that the change hits. But yeah, I'm pretty sad to see my pet deck go, but I guess people weren't really happy with me getting 7 mana on turn 3 and then 40 mana on turn 4, I guess.
Yeah, we'll talk about 7 mana on turn 3 in a little bit, but Realms Overturning not letting you use untap your lands with Rejuvenation or Fulfill Twisted Dreams means that that kind of combo aspect of the deck doesn't exist anymore, so it can't go over quite a few decks. That kind of ramp package is still probably fine. It's probably not great, but it's probably workable, just since I think you mentioned a lot of times you were boarding out the combo even.
Yeah, but another change that we're going to mention later is probably going to put a huge damper on 7 lands on turn 3.
So Realms Overturning wasn't banned, it was reworked, but unfortunately the rework card is not particularly great. Unless if you really want to do something funky.
Well, I don't think you can even do anything funky with it, because all it really does is just give you extra mana that you already have.
A card that lets you play a card that costs X, where X is the number of lands you control, is just, it's almost like satirical. Obviously it probably has some random use case, but probably not very many.
Yeah.
So going into more of the combo changes, I think most of these were motivated by 2 decks in Chew the Scenery and EHS Storm.
After the previous Storm decks have all gotten nerfed or parts banned. So yeah, a pretty good record for Storm decks in this format, all things considered.
Yeah, so these are kind of preemptive, where Chew the Scenery has gotten good league results, but hasn't seen play in GPs. That being relevant mainly because I think the deck is kind of weak to counter magic, and also doesn't really have that much as sideboards because it plays World Made Anew. But still quite a scary deck. EHS Storm hasn't been played really at all, to the point where like there's not even a deck list really anywhere besides in deck building, but is scary.
Yeah, and that deck really leveraged Hellbent Speed outside of the Crazy Train shell, because turns out Hellbent Speed is good in not just Crazy Train, but in just combo in general.
Yeah, so there's like 15 cards being changed or so, 7 of them are from that deck, where Hellbent Speed, Lotus Study, Scintillate, Unleash the Dragon, Ardy's Invocation, as well as Zhedina Exchange, and Breach the Lilies. Those 7 cards were all included in the deck. So yeah, I kind of blasted from orbit before it saw much play at all. Now, as far as other decks are concerned, these changes are a bit weird in terms of like being like any kind of madness, just because, well, not a lot of decks were playing these combo cards. They're combo cards for a reason. So it's not like a Valdez or something, where it's like most black decks were playing Valdez. So you're not going to have to edit for these changes. But it does mean quite a bit for deck building, in that Lotus Studies and Scintillate being banned means that mana fixing is much harder for combo decks. During the combo, Ardy's Invocation, similarly, where combo decks are restricted to rituals that make only red, which is very restrictive.
There's no Metamorphose effect in the format. Life-Giving Waters, our only Metamorphose effect, is already banned, so yeah, don't even think about it.
In Modern, you can kind of get away with it with Metamorphose. Here, not so much. So really, as far as like ritual combos, you're probably better off looking at elsewhere for combo decks, looking for like 2-card combos with Casino Scam or whatnot.
So Ardy's Invocation has been reworked to now free casting a card with mana value X or less, where X is 1 plus the greatest mana value of spells you've cast this turn, and it costs red-green to orchestrate. But as Purplemurasaki has noticed, this actually leads to a lot of broken things too.
it's been mentioned that this might get a change before the GP, which is in less than a week.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things that work with this really easily. In like 20, 30 minutes of searching, there's a lot of ways you can turn to a 4-drop with just this plus another decent card.
Like Storm Surge?
Yeah, Storm Surge being the most generic of them. Kaione of the Golden Sonata also does something very similar, but also just like interactions with Ali's Council and Conjure Realities, where if you have it in hand, you can fetch your 5-drop, then recast it off the Tallies or the Conjure, and then recast the Ardies, and then the Ardies recast the 5-drop. Like EHS, it ramps into EHS. If you hit it off EHS, you get to play 4-drop, which is pretty scary in combo. Bells, just does a lot.
Yeah, but since it's probably going to get changed before the next GP, we won't talk too much about it. But talking about other green 3-mana cards, we have Bessie's Brood, who's now a 3-3 from a 3-4, and...
Yeah, so that 1 toughness means quite a bit because of how much Bessie Brood as a card interacts with combat, pound toughness wise, where ETB it fights, and then it's also very relevant as a blocker and an attacker in any deck that plays it. This probably ends up being a good change just because Bessie's Brood was really ubiquitous in any deck that could cast it, especially in the sideboard, where you could just throw 4 Bessie's Brood in the sideboard and just kind of go to town on any opponent playing medium, small creatures. Against like Burn, as an example, it's a 3-for-1 if they want to get through on the ground. When it comes down, eats a creature, and then they need to kill it through some combination of a burn spell and a creature running into it, or 2 burn spells. Really not what they want to be doing. Other aggro decks kind of dimly run into that 4 toughness, but now as a 3-3, it's dying to bolts. So if your aggro deck plays a random Scorch, that works. Especially any kind of instant speed bolt effect is going to be pretty unfortunate for Bessie's Brood. Where previously, if your opponent bolted it, then it'd at least also trade with the creature.
If your opponent bolts your Bessie's Brood in response to the ETB, that's just a huge blowout. And I think you basically just lose the game at that point if you're relying on it stabilizing you on turn 3.
Yeah, definitely not what you want your sideboard card to be doing, dying to a single bolt. Bolts are probably the main point of interaction, but you also have just like the fact that it has a higher chance of trading on the ETB. Not relevant in every matchup, like Green-White Creature Vomit, Flare X is probably another one, where these picking off random 1/1s and 2/1s and whatnot isn't really going to change how Bessie's Brood interacts with the opponent. But once you start to get into decks that go bigger, it starts to be a bit sketchy on whether Bessie's Brood trades or eats something.
And Hesir Red with their 3-power 3-drops in Rattler and Emissary.
Also, in House of Red having instant speed bolts. There's also some other random things like counters. If you're on the draw, Evergnawing Route equally scales with it, so they'll trade. At least if you're on the draw. If you're on the play, then it's still good enough. But that it does create a kind of play-draw dichotomy that wasn't there before. Hounds also, as previously mentioned, has a similar dichotomy where like on the play, a 3-3 is probably good enough to eat lords. On the draw, they probably have another lord down and you're starting trading. Other side interaction like Mattia. Mattia attacks as a 3-3. Bessie's Brood then turns into a bolt, which isn't great. Overall, it's a fairly sizable downgrade, but it's also still the only option for a lot of decks.
Yeah. If you're in white, you might just want to look into going with Confining Priest instead.
Yeah, Confining Priest is a good option in white, though definitely doesn't win the game like Bessie's Brood sometimes does. Helene Devastator is, of course, an option if you're in Jund, but kind of outside that, there's not a ton of options besides just playing actual removal.
Or, just playing Byron's Gambit and removal instead of having a 2-in-1.
Yeah, definitely spreads out your sideboard slots quite a bit. Though some decks probably still want Bessie's Brood. So like Logger Recluse decks made really good use of Bessie's Brood because not only does Bessie Brood build creature removal quotient, but also the combination of Bessie's Brood and Logger Recluses, even if they're just your only 2 creatures, as a way to beat down the opponent, was generally pretty powerful. But other decks probably just want to be switching off to something else.
So moving on. So Blade's Memory, which is Enraptured Countess' tail, now exiles the target and allows you to cast it from giving it flashback.
Yeah, so it kind of prevents you from getting around the sorcery speed restriction if you target an instant. So in the Prowess deck, for example, you can target Strongarm, but you can't hold Strongarm into combat and see how your opponent blocks before casting it. You need to cast it immediately with Fire Burst. Overall, not that big of a change. Might lose a couple points here and there.
Yeah,
but
it's mostly just nerfing some corner case scenarios.
Yeah, I think it updates the wording a bit too. Breach of Lilies has a similar change, but more impactful in that instead of casting from the graveyard and then putting a card back in the graveyard, it now casts from exile, or it casts a copy from exile, rather.
So it properly exiles the card that you cast just like every other flashback spell does.
Yes.
And like Breach of Lily was actually pretty unique, just because it's a spell that lets you cast from the graveyard that doesn't exile the thing that's casting.
Yeah, so a lot of the decks that kind of made really good use of the graveyard don't want Breach of Lilies so much. Main two decks without playing Breach of Lilies was Tropic Thunder, using the Scripts package, as well as Molten EHS, which not as big as a deal, but does kind of want cards in graveyard for a performance of a lifetime.
Yeah, so I think Tropic Thunder is not going to run Breach anymore because they really need the extra copies in the graveyard for all their spells that care about named copies in the yard.
Yeah, that interaction seemed like at the core of why Breach of Lilies was run in Tropic Thunder.
Yeah, and then Molten EHS, I think it probably still has to run Breach because like it doesn't really have any better options, but it's definitely worse now because you can't keep your cards in the yard for performance.
Yeah, it's probably not that big of a deal, but if you kind of like want to flashback Solar Flare a couple times, might be a bit annoying there. Breach of Lilies is still a really good card. Interacting with like Epsilon is really nice. Just getting 2 spellcasts is also really nice. But exiling does kind of hinder its versatility in some of the cases that it's being used in.
Yeah.
What is kind of interesting about both of these changes is that the copy is cast from exile. So stuff like Mystic Parliament or Blessing of Satar, as another example, those things trigger off these effects now, where previously they didn't. So that opens up some new use cases with both of them. Breach of Lilies and Mystic Parliament being kind of interesting as Breach of Lilies gets back Mystic Parliament, which gives you some good versatility in your card advantage permanent. Unfortunately, they're on a bit of weird colors at times, but you probably aren't playing both of them, so not that major of a change.
At least we have something interesting to come out of the nerfs, even if it was slightly unintentional. So next up, Ginjiro Chimei has been reworked. It now costs 2 life extra to cast from the graveyard and entombs a card with an activated ability on ETB. So I don't actually know what the card used to do before the changes because I've never heard of the card before, but I have to assume it's not very impactful because I haven't heard of the card before. Probably some sort of EDH thing, but
yeah,
we're not an EDH channel, so...
Yeah, it used to do a very wonky effect with copying stuff in the graveyard. The graveyard becomes the copy of stuff. Now it's kind of interesting, but also probably ends up being too expensive.
Yeah, format is just too much if you want to entomb stuff.
Yeah, it does have some utility, because as far as I'm aware, there's not another option for 4-mana entomb creatures. If you need that very specific slot in like what lurks beyond, back in the back style of the deck.
Well, it's not even a creature. You can entomb anything with an activated ability. So, you know, planeswalkers, non-creature permanents, even spells actually, like Brazen Sacred Lich has an activated ability. So you can entomb that if you want. And Rogar's Frenzy too. So yeah, I guess if you want to try doing something with that.
Yeah, if you want to go really deep, you can also get to Fail Twisted Dreams having an activated ability.
Yeah.
So if you want to try some combo stuff, maybe there's something there. But I think in general, it's probably not that excellent a card. But 4 mana is just a lot.
So next up, Perfect Solution now creates a tap treasure token, but Ready for Anything now investigates instead of creating a treasure token. This seems like Perfect Solution ripped off the treasure mode from Ready for Anything. And, well, Perfect Solution doesn't matter because it's a limited fodder, but Ready for Anything losing the treasure mode is a really big nerf.
Yeah, your common card from Seasons of War versus my common card from Seasons of War. Definitely a very large gap in power level. Ready for Anything being changed is kind of interesting, where the treasure token, obviously incredibly powerful in letting you get kind of abuse King Dancer, spells, Commanding Princess, winning the last GP, called Thunder Princess, where getting Thunder Road's mana faster is great, as well as getting 4 mana on turn 3 for your Cane Dancer shells, so your massive stack of 2-drops suddenly comes out and faster. But now with Investigating, it's kind of interesting because Ready for Anything, I think, is just still the best 2-mana Cane Danceable draw spell.
Right, because it's competing with Reveal Eternities, which doesn't really interact well with Cane Dancer, or at least you're losing out on value from the flashback of the card itself, or a Plant Far, Far Away, which you can't flashback with Cane Dancer until you leitmotif it, and then flashing it back doesn't give you the leitmotif.
At the very least, you do get the leitmotif trigger off the Cane Dancer, so it will be in yard, the ETB. But yeah, drawing a card is not anywhere close to scrying to and drawing a card and getting a treasure, even though you do get 2 cards off the initial cast. getting the clue in Cane Dancer Shells is actually pretty nice because, as it turns out, instant speed, 2 mana is what your entire deck is in Cane Dancer Shells a lot of times. So having the clue as additional option, your opponent doesn't play a card you want to Portal Fracture, crack a clue. It does also add a lot of card advantage to Cane Dancer. We're shifting from treasure, acceleration to investigations, card advantage. That's kind of shift up the power level a bit in a different way. So Cane Dancer Shells going really long might be more of a thing, whereas previously, even though you had a lot of card advantage, you maybe couldn't have grinded with the decks going super long.
But speaking of blue 2-mana instants in Cane Dancer Shells, the shifting lands have been nerfed. Instead of being able to sack them at any time to make a tapped land token, you have to sack them during your upkeep, and it requires tapping them. But in return, the land tokens are untapped. So this basically means that you can no longer turn to confirm your shifting lands.
Yeah, since the shifting lands need to tap on upkeep, as that you can't kind of double up where you tap it for mana and sacrifice it.
So the earliest you can really confirm your shifting lands is on turn 4, actually. I think this deals a huge blow to any sort of deck that uses confirm plus shifting lands, because now you're basically just confirming a fetch land at that point, and you really don't want to be confirming fetch lands.
Yeah, I mean, Confirming Fetch Land does get you the same amount of mana, but what's really awkward with Confirm not being a 2-drop anymore is that a lot of the decks were built around getting to 4 on turn 3.
Yeah, like Cosmic Thunder Princess especially. It even used Ready for Anything to have 8 ways to get to 4 mana on turn 3. But now both versions of the effect have been nerfed.
What's really awkward with that is that a lot of the times 4 is where constructed decks top out. So getting from 3 to 5 is nowhere near as important as getting from 2 to 4. Quick examples of this being like Infectious Ego, a lot of the blue-black shells, turn 3 Infectious Ego, still really good. You can't do anymore. Blue-white Planeswalkers, really want to be casting 4-drop Planeswalkers on turn 3, can't do that anymore.
Unless you use Barton's Journal, but
Yeah,
yeah.
but you do lose quite a bit of redundancy there. Where it also kind of just messes up your curve in general, where the previously mentioned Cane Dancer Shells, not only do they not going to do 4 on turn 3, but you also have to play an interactive piece on turn 2, or else just waste your mana. With Confirm being kind of a passing card, where you get some advantage, your opponent plays whatever, you don't really care, was really important, where you don't really want to be Portal Factory on turn 2. Same with Bounty of the Gardens, like, those aren't cards you want to play on turn 2. So needing to play something on turn 2 that's not confirmed kind of messes up your curve in that way. A lot of the decks that were playing confirmed just don't really want it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you can try to confirm your opponent's fetches, but that's not really something you can reliably bank on really happening against an opponent that knows what they're doing.
If the opponent knows you're on Confirm Hypothesis, it's pretty easy to just go, oh, I'll play my fetch on turn 1, and then I'll play my second fetch on turn 3. I'll play the natural non-fetch land on turn 2. And suddenly you're kind of out of luck. Or alternatively, if they're on the play, then they play fetch on turn 1 and 2, and then non-fetch on turn 3, etc. That's not to say Confirm has no use case. In the Cane Dancer Shells, if you confirm a fetch land on turn 3, you do still get to play a 2-drop in that same turn, which is something, even though it does mess up your curve and whatnot. The thing is that you probably do need to have some kind of big mana payoff to really make use of Confirm Hypothesis, where a lot of decks playing Confirm didn't really care about having additional lands. I didn't mind them, but it's not critical. Where now I think you kind of do need that persistent mana source to be very useful in the deck to kind of justify Confirm. So in that sense, in Control Shell, maybe you want some Cosmic Coalescings or some Delve for Treasures, End of All Things, these very expensive cards that you can sink all your mana into late. Confirm also has some use case with Sangjin, since that gives you up to 8 3-mana ramp pieces that are at instant speed, which is kind of a bit of a unique effect.
Yeah, but 3-mana ramp is just a lot worse than 2-mana ramp.
Yeah. The one case where like that sounds still kind of good is Room Brawler, because well, you have your 5-drop, right? Room Brawler.
Yeah, but the problem with Room Brawler now is that shifting lands basically let you bank land drops, but with the change, you can no longer sack them at any time.
Yeah, so that makes Room Brawler way worse, since a lot of the play patterns with Room Brawler became way more degenerate with shifting lands, where you could play Room Brawler 5 mana, crack a shifting land, play Bounty of the Gardens, Burning Up, whatever. Pass it, turn to your opponent, upkeep, crack another shifting land, do it again. Where like Burning Up was particularly degenerate with this, where you could get 15 damage in a turn cycle. That's not doable anymore. Roomball is still kind of a good card, but this change takes a lot of the edge off Roomball's top end.
Yeah, and something else that the shifting land change also nerfs is Untouched Wilds, because a lot of the Untouched Wilds decks, which basically just boil down to various flavors of land vomit, including rejuvenation, you wanted to be able to play Untouched Wilds for 3 on turn 2. And shifting lands basically gave you a way to make untap mana and also sack your lands. So they basically acted as redundant copies of fetch lands, except they're not fetching lands out of your deck, so you don't run out of fetchables super quickly like with playing fetch lands.
So the real awkward thing about shifting lands with Untouched Wilds now is that there's not really a ton to play them. Where you really want to be playing a 1-drop on turn 1 to ramp up a Log of Recluse being proper one. Shifting lands don't cast Log of Recluse. They need to fetch out a land to do that. Turn 2, okay, you can still play a shifting land. But turn 3, you need another fetch land. So on top of Untouched Wilds being a kind of unwieldy card, where you need to have 3 lands that go to graveyard, basically in your opening hand, you now can't play a shifting land on turn 3, so you need 2 fetches, which adds another layer of unwieldiness to it.
Not exactly turn 3, but just third land, because Log of Recluse is accelerating your land drops. Also, Off-Road Surveyors is even worse off, because unlike Log of Recluse, you can't even get the second land drop if you want to get the shifting land to yard, because with Log of Recluse, at least you can drop the land to play on the same turn and then sack it the next turn, but with Off-Road Surveyors, you have no opportunity to stack the shifting land before Untouched Wilds.
Yeah.
Getting a nut draw, definitely a lot harder now with the shifting land nerf.
Yeah, well, even just with the limited amount of fetchables, and mind you, Rejuvelous was on 28 lands, which is kind of incredible.
Yeah.
You still need 7 fetchables. That's a lot of fetchables. And if you draw a couple of those, then you can't get Untouched Wilds out.
Yeah, and if you're only getting back fetch lands with your Untouched Wilds, then you basically run out of fetchables after your first Untouched Wilds. So any fetch lands you draw after that basically become dead cards. Of course, Rejuvenation is dead anyways because of this Realms Overturning nerf, but this Shifting Land nerf also basically kills chances of any future Untouched Wilds-based land vomit deck.
So shifting lands, if you're using them as they're kind of, I think, more so intended to be used, where you just play a couple copies, fix your mana, but you can use the colorless when it comes in play, and then next turn you can use the color mana, kind of like a reverse Crumbling Vestige, kind of like a weird tap land, but not quite tap land. If you're using it for that, still pretty good. Light nerf in some cases, maybe harder to play on Quillia as an example, but overall not that big of a deal. Imperial Siege too, but who plays Imperial Siege? Moving forward, we have Strongarm. Strongarm's treasure now enters tapped. This mainly helps you not get killed on turn 2 or turn 3 with various decks that abuse Strongarm.
Most notably Blue-Red Prowess, because as we've seen, Blue-Red Prowess is a very explosive deck, and I think Strongarm, allowing you to basically recast +2/+1 trample, is a part of that.
It also works worse in multiples, where you can't just vomit all of them out in sequence. Overall, probably not that big of a deal. Blue-Red Prowess is taking the kind of the principal deck playing Strongarm. Probably lose a couple percentage points just off the high end, but chances are it's probably not going to matter too much in most games.
Something else that Strongarm used to be able to do was fix your mana, because, for example, if you had a Strongarm plus another red spell, but only 1 red source, you can use that Strongarm treasure to fix your mana and cast 2 red spells in a turn, but that's no longer possible.
Yeah. Again, that probably shouldn't happen too often, especially in these 2-color decks, which Strongarm decks typically are. If you're trying 3-color Strongarm, then that's probably a pretty big deal. It makes you really not want to fetch basics.
So, the Oltenen Emissary has also been changed. It now lets you cast spells for Wooburg and gives temporary omniscience when you do. So also another card that I don't really know what it did beforehand, because nobody really played it, because it's more of a commander bait than anything. Yeah. But I guess this change, does it really change much? It's still an 8-mana commander bait card.
Yeah, you're paying 8 mana for anything, it better win the game. This you need to pay 13 mana for. There are some kind of crazy stuff that you can maybe consider doing. You can play Witch Queen Yorog, which lowers your curse's costs by Wooburg, coincidentally. So if you have Oltenen Emissary, Witch Queen Yorog, and a curse, then you get Omniscience.
Yay!
Yeah. And I mean, how much does Omniscience cost?
Less than whatever that cost.
Yeah, but you can split it up, and that's the important thing.
Yeah.
And the curse is free, so really it's just 11 mana. And we're like, Omniscience costs. No one knows how much Omniscience costs, because everyone just cheats it out. But Omniscience actually only costs 10, so. But you get to split it up, so. You
Yeah.
get, like, Witch Queen Yogg on turn 7, and then turn 8, Oltenen Emissary, and you get Omniscience.
And then find something else to do with the Omniscience because
Yeah,
you've already spent 3 cards in your hand.
Yeah, but you see, you just cast a curse, so Witch Queen Yogg will draw a card. You'll get there somehow.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Anyways, moving on. The Tidal Spite is now a sorcery. And this change mostly hits the Blue Flyers decks because those decks really liked holding up Tidal Spite, especially if they had Apanya or Orichi to flash in. And also hurts them because they run Sunset River, which untaps your opponent's turn. So if you were sequencing your spells correctly and have enough things to do on both your turn and your opponent's turn, then you're basically getting 2 mana out of your Sunrise Rivers.
Yeah, so any kind of aggro deck that could use Tidal Spite probably doesn't want it that much anymore. It's probably alright in the sideboard, but maybe even kind of narrow there, where Flyers being the main deck that could run it. Soldiers, if you go into blue-white, probably could run it too, since you have the Aura Shapers as Knight/Soldiers. The Workers' Chevalier Lance give you an Aura for Tidal Spite. Still probably okay there. Fortunately, if you're playing Tidal Spite as like a defensive card for your Planeswalkers, you probably don't care too much.
Yeah, for example, in the Bat Barks deck.
Yeah, so if you play Cameo on turn 3 on top of your land, you probably just find Sorcery Speaking the Tidal Spite.
Slightly worse, but because you can't hold it up, but yeah.
Yeah, but you're not going to be. There's not really enough haste creatures to like care that much about it. And chances are you're probably going to need to Tidal Spite in combat anyways, just because, well, the creatures are probably attacking your Tamio.
Yeah. But moving on, so Zhedina Exchange has been reworked. It now chooses a basic land type and allows basic lands of that type to tap for mana of any color. And its old effect was just letting you use one color of mana as any color of mana.
Yeah, so this exchange is kind of interesting. It kind of lets you play mono-colored 5-color, where like Chosen One and Augmented becomes doable in a monocolor deck, which is kind of cool.
Downside is that Zhedina Exchange taps for colorless, so if you're trying to take advantage of being able to run really heavy color requirements in a monocolor deck, this kind of screws with that.
Yeah, it's kind of awkward. You also can't really play off-color cards with just it, since, well, you're not always going to have a copy, even if you play 4.
You can try to World Maiden it, but then you're like going really deep at that point.
Yeah, at that point, there's probably just better things to be doing. So, in addition to like the triple red cost, if you want to play Rapacious Rattler,
Ornan Hesir.
Yeah, Ornan Hesir, not a mountain. Or any of these other like triple red, triple white, whatever cards, it's not great for that. You kind of want to be playing these augmented Chosen One cards, make full use of it. But at the same time, well, it taps a colorless, and colorless doesn't really work with the Wooburg, unfortunately. So you need to get up 6 lands, which kind of hinders your ability to use Chosen One/Augmented. It's probably still fine if you're using L or like Rising Ruggling, because you have plenty of mana to get to like 6 mana to do augmented stuff. But if you're playing like red, maybe planning to do like Mena as your payoff Chosen One of choice. Yeah, are you really getting 6 lands? I don't know about that.
Yeah. And plus, if you're in red, then you have the Ninhasir problem, so...
Yeah. There are the new lands from Seasons of the War, which do a kind of similar effect, but they don't give 5 color, but they do give another color. So if you want to splash with Rapacious Rattler, those might be a better way to do it.
And they're also fetchable, so like...
Yeah, the fetch ability being a really key part, where they getting 8 copies, even just with a single on-color fetch in like 2-color decks, really massively ramps up the ability to find them.
Yeah, the only downside is that they require a payment of 1 life.
The 1 life isn't too bad, but you do also have to pay for the fetches, so it does ramp up a little bit.
Yeah.
But probably worth doing over trying to mess around with Zhedina Exchange to get your 2-color. If you're doing 5-color, you probably need Zhedina Exchange, but you're already kind of being a bit ambitious.
But with all the talks of nerfs and stuff, we do have a new addition to the format. Mercantile Accords is unbanned, and that card was banned quite a while ago, before I even started playing, so I have no idea what this card really looked like or what decks it went into. But yeah, it's now unleashed onto the format, so it definitely goes into white soldiers, right?
Yeah, I think Soldiers makes particular use of it, just with how Soldiers works, where they really front load a lot of their damage, where like really by turn 2 the Soldiers are like happy with their board, which is kind of unique for an aggro deck, where Turn 2, you need to answer Soldier's board, whereas like a Hound's deck, you really only need to answer the board after EHS or get another couple lords down. A bit slower, same with Legends. They really need their turn 3. And Soldiers really only needs the first 2 turns to get a really good pressuring board down. They can make really good use of that. Also, maybe more importantly, is that Soldiers can be mono white.
Yeah.
Which, casting a triple white card, not the easiest thing in the world.
Especially on turn 3.
You can do it in decks that don't have on like mono white. As previously mentioned, the new lands from Season of War, you can play the white version of those if you have a lot of basics. Also, the filter lands let you cast on turn 3 pretty easily, but those come and play tapped, so not perfect for an aggro deck. Still definitely doable. I'm not entirely sure if this goes in the sideboard or the main deck, to be completely honest. As far as hate pieces go, it is a really good main deck hate piece, because every deck has spells equal to mana value X, where X is whatever you choose.
Yeah. I think you're mostly going to be choosing 2, right?
Yeah, I think 2 is probably the best choice, except if there's special cases, maybe against Sean, do you name 4 sometimes, Infectious Ego, Helling Devastator, Rot, that's another important card.
Yeah.
It's a bind mind, at the very least, even if it's just Rot.
Yeah.
Most other cases, you're probably naming 2. Cane Dancer decks, of course. 2 is the big number. EHS decks, of course. 2 is also generally the big number. It is a bit awkward. Like in Soldiers, or like Champion and Underpass Sentinel are both pretty good cards. But fortunately, you don't play that many 2-drops. So you can like side them out, or just cast them before you cast Mercantile Accords. So it's probably not that big of a deal. Naming 3 is probably okay too. That's easier in Soldiers. 1, if you're naming 1, it's a bit awkward, especially in aggro decks like Soldiers, again, big on 1-drops. But some decks are really messed up by Mercantile Accords on 1. Burn, as an example, Prowess as another. But at the same time, you really want to be playing a 3-mana do-nothing versus those decks, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
On the play, it's probably pretty good, though.
And also, Mercantile Accords goes into Lantern, assuming Lantern is a real deck.
Yeah, if you want to do some like really funky lock setups, there are a lot of good lock enchantments. Starfield Workgate makes a lot of good blockers. Idyllic Odyssey does eventually win the game, and it's also just drives you towards your Mercantile Accords. 2 is pretty easy, and 3, I mean, you don't care about your other Mercantile Accords that much if you're naming 3. So maybe there's some kind of locks up there. Maybe throw in some Bind Minds too, just for good measure.
Yeah, just don't let your opponent play the game. I think that's all of the balance changes. So, general thoughts on the changes? For me, at least, I'm extremely sad that my pet deck, Rejuvenationless Rejuvenation, is dragged out the back and shot in the head, because they've nerfed Realms Overturning to hit the unfair parts of the deck, and the Shifting Lands to hit the, well, not exactly fair, but like fair in the same way that Tron is fair part of the deck. So, I don't think Rejuvenationless Rejuve is coming back. But the other deck I was running, Green-White Creature Vomit, is completely untouched, and that deck feels pretty degenerate, so I'm definitely going to try running it again next GP and seeing if Council does anything about it.
Yeah, I'm definitely a bit mixed on these changes. None of these cards I had particular plans on playing, but I also have no idea what I'm playing at any given moment anyways. Definitely have played a few of these, maybe more than a few of these cards. I think I played most of them, actually.
I feel like you've been directly responsible for at least a few of these nerfs.
Yeah, maybe not all of them, but Rejuve is definitely one of my decks. Bessie's Brood is definitely a card that I've jammed 4 of in every Green deck I've ever played, and I've definitely cashed a few Unleash the Dragons. But I think kind of 2 minds where a lot of these changes I'm a big fan of, where Hellbent Speed it looks pretty degenerate, and it really is. A lot of these other things like Tidal Spite being instant, if you're playing with Tamu and whatnot, pretty fair card. If you're playing with Flyers, less of a fair card. Where it's really that card that makes you kind of be like, oh, why am I playing creatures to begin with? Where you regret the creature tagline. Ready for anything? I think I might be the only person who's played this card.
Well, you've gotten nerfed after only 1 GP.
Well, there's definitely a progression in there where it's, oh, well, wait, no, this random common is really the best card in the deck. Wow, and I'm playing King Dance and Bounty, and this is still the best card. Still a good card, but
in a different way.
I'm definitely not the happiest with Lotus Studies and Scintillate being banned. I feel like those cards, as far as combo decks go, were mostly innocent. where really a lot of the more degenerate combo decks were more so abusing Ardy's Invocation, playing 5-color mana bases. Weenie Infuse being a good example of that, where they just played Ardy's Invocation, they didn't mess around with Lotus Studies and Skin to Light. True the Scenery and the Tally Council's combo decks also really like Ardy's Invocation over Skin to Light and Lotus Studies. And Scintillating and Lotus Studies being banned means that any kind of non-linear combo, where you're relying on rituals, doing some kind of broken-ish thing, that all needs to be red, which is not really doable. So really all the combo decks are kind of relegated to be 2-card combos or kind of deterministic kills, where you kind of are playing more fair magic, even though you win immediately after doing a combo. A lot of the more like typical Storm type decks where you're like, oh yeah, that's Storm. Those decks don't really exist, where you have to do some really funky things to get other colors of mana. And the cards exist, but the decks don't really exist. Well, Blood Still Flows being maybe the pinnacle example of this. Like, yes, it makes different colors of mana, but no, this is not Seething Song. So you're probably going to have to shift your longer combo chains to something, to a different medium. I mean, 8-sack still exists, something you can do.
Yeah.
But if you want to get your storm count to 15 naturally, you probably can't do that very easily anymore. And if you're doing this, it's going to be do something degenerate. Mysteries of Luck, Kelly's Council, Mana Spell Cost Producer. That gives you infinite storm, but not exactly what I mean.
And you Unleash Your Dragon's banned anyway, so like you have no outlet for your Infinite Storm.
Yeah, but I think all the other changes are pretty good. A lot of kind of housekeeping almost. Tidal Spite probably should have been a source to begin with. Realms Overturning probably shouldn't have existed to begin with.
Hey, Rejuvenation is a fair and balanced deck that deserves the right to exist.
Yeah, I mean, it ended up that way. It didn't feel that way to begin with, but definitely ended up that way. Breach of the Lilies exiling probably should have done that to begin with. Kind of similar to Basalt Ritualist. It had that kind of unique thing. Basalt Ritualist got changed quite a bit ago. Ready for Anything, probably more fair now. Gives you an interesting fact. Treasure being tapped. All these changes are kind of nice housekeeping. Bessie's Brood, no longer mandatory in every green deck ever. But yeah.
Yeah. And I guess this concludes our review of the May balance patches. So, yeah,